Ruston is a small town located in Louisiana in the United States. The population is about 20,000 and in many ways is your typical southern town. There's a tight-knit, everyone knows everyone kind of community. The only thing more important than the Friday night football game is the Sunday morning church service, and up until recently, the public school system was racially segregated. I know in coming up with ways to describe a typical southern town, the first thing that comes to mind probably isn't racially segregated public education system, but unfortunately this was more common than we realize. Before I focus on what this looks like in Ruston, I'll zoom out some first and briefly touch on how segregated schools are still alive and well in the United States. School segregation isn't a thing of the past. In 1988, there were 2,762 schools in the U.S. where 1% or less of the student population was white. In 2011, that number was 6,727. It would be one thing if this racial disparity existed in schools that were equivalent academically, but that is far from the case. For example, Black and Latino students are more likely to attend schools with inexperienced teachers, in fact, twice as likely as their white peers. And when it comes to being able to take more rigorous courses such as calculus, physics, chemistry, and algebra 2, it's less common for these courses to even be offered in schools with high Black and Latino enrollment. Less of an academic challenge means less college preparedness, which means less students going to college at all. These are just a couple examples of how racial disparity is linked to a lack of resources in academia, but regardless, the fact remains that American schools are more segregated now than they have been in the past 4 decades. This problem should have been moving toward resolution when the Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964, so why is school segregation still prevalent? Well, the Civil Rights Act was made to abolish any segregation by law. It targeted schools that enforced whites-only or blacks-only student populations, but it did nothing to resolve racial imbalance in schools that were never racially designated in the first place. And neglecting to desegregate non-legally segregated institutions is why so many schools are still segregated to this day. Case in point, Ruston, Louisiana. In 1966, a school desegregation lawsuit against the Lincoln Parish School Board was initiated by the United States Department of Justice. Lawsuits like this were commonplace following the Civil Rights Act, so neither party thought much of it. In May 2011, a status update was ordered for this case and found that the Lincoln Parish School Board had failed to comply to the court order, the 45-year-old court order. Furthermore, the DOJ found that 3 out of the 4 public elementary schools in the parish seat of Ruston were racially identifiable, meaning there was an apparent majority of black or white students. Let me break down both the racial demographics and the public school system in Ruston. Ruston has a population of about 22,300 residents. This is the racial makeup of the population: 51% white, 42% black, and 7% for the other races. As previously mentioned, there are 4 public elementary schools in Ruston. Beyond that, there is only 1 public middle school, 1 public junior high school, and 1 public high school. So regardless of residence, all students in the public education system end up in the same place. In the meantime, however, they generally go to the elementary school that's closest to their neighborhood. In the 2011-2012 school year, for grades kindergarten through 5th grade, the total enrollment was 1,978 students. Of that, 38% were white, 58% were black, and 4% other. However, none of the elementary schools were reflective of this population. The 3 schools that were racially identifiable were Cypress Springs Elementary, Hillcrest Elementary, and Ruston Elementary, each having a noticeable majority of a certain race. The one non-racially identifiable school was Glenview Elementary, though even then its student population wasn't reflective of the overall population. One of the biggest forces behind this is racial distribution. This is a map of the city limits of Ruston and its districts. This is the percentage of black households. As you can see, most of the black residents are concentrated in the south-central area of town. Now, this is where the elementary schools are located. As one might have guessed, there's also a discrepancy in these schools' academic performances. The Louisiana Department of Education gives all public schools a grade based on, quote, student achievement on annual assessments in English language arts, math, science, and social studies, end quote. Each score is out of a possible 200 points. In the 2009 to 2010 school year, the average grade for a Louisiana public school was a 92.5, or a C. In Ruston, the elementary schools performed as follows, ranked from best to worst. Hillcrest, 118.4, Glenview 102.7, Cypress Springs 83.7, Ruston 69.1. Moreover, the LAD of A also reports on what percentage of students are performing above or at their expected grade level. Those percentages were Hillcrest 82.8%, Glenview 68.6%, Cypress Springs 58.9%, Ruston 36.5%. And just as another point, this map shows all the districts where 50% or more of the children live below the poverty line. And again, this is where the elementary schools are located. 2 schools are in one of those districts, 2 aren't. These 4 elementary schools may be part of the same system, but as far as how well they serve their role in educating their students, they're vastly different. And yet, after 5th grade, the students from Hillcrest Elementary, where 8 out of 10 perform at their expected grade level, end up in the same school as the students from Ruston Elementary, where only 3 out of 10 are performing as expected. That's probably why the 3 other public schools in Ruston appear to have a closer to average performance. You have a dichotomy. You have a good portion of students who spent their K through 5 years getting an average to above average educational experience, and another portion who haven't. Put them together and the results will even out. In 2012, the Lincoln Parish School Board drafted up this model to desegregate the schools. Glenview and Cypress Springs were to become K through 2 schools, and Hillcrest and Ruston Elementary were to be 3 through 5. Since this model was only just recently implemented, it's going to take a couple years before we can discern how much of an impact this desegregation order will have on the students once they finish elementary school and begin their middle, junior, and high school academic careers. But in the meantime, I want to wrap up what I'm saying here with this. Though I'm from Ruston, I don't live in Louisiana at this time. Right now I live in Idaho, where I'm going to university and pursuing a secondary education, so I'm a pretty long ways away from my home state. I graduated from Ruston High in 2013, and since I don't have any younger siblings, this desegregation order hasn't impacted my life personally. So when I tell people that my hometown's public school system had to be desegregated in 2012, most people are shocked and think this is an isolated incident in a little racist town in the South. But that's far from all there is to it. School segregation is happening everywhere. Yes, it's happening in the South in smaller communities such as middle of nowhere Louisiana, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But major urban areas such as Chicago, Los Angeles, and Detroit bring their states Illinois, California, and Michigan down with them. New York City is the worst offender of them all, thus leading New York State to be rated as the #1 state with the most segregated schools. The point I'm getting at here, and with this entire video, is one I mentioned before. School segregation isn't a thing of the past. There are millions of students of color, equally as intelligent and capable as their white peers, who are being deprived of a quality education simply because their public school systems are neglecting to solve the problems that have existed for decades now. I hope that through this video, giving you a semi-anecdotal example of how this large-scale issue happens in a small setting, I can really put into perspective how prevalent and dynamic yet insidious school segregation is.